Hi everyone, so today's video is on Ngugi wa Thiong'o's postcolonial essay, The Language of African Literature from Decolonizing the Mind. In The Language of African Literature, Decolonizing the Mind, Ngugi wa Thiong'o presents a series of arguments about the colonizers' politics of language and the presence of imperialism in post-colonial societies. He wants to talk about this issue because he wants to highlight how imperialism continues to control the economy, politics, and cultures of Africa, even in the present time. So he recounts an experience he had in a 1962 conference held in Makerere University College in Uganda. And this conference was about African writings in European expressions. Basically, the title of the conference was A Conference of African Writers in English Expressions. And in this conference, they did not acknowledge the writings of great African poets and writers who wrote in African language. Rather, it welcomed and acknowledged writers who wrote in English. This instance being presented in the initial section of the essay sets the theme of the entire essay. And we will see Ngugi wa Thiong'o posing a series of questions about what African literature meant. So he asked, was it literature about Africa or about the African experience? Was it literature written by Africans? What about a non-African who wrote about Africa? Did his work qualify as an African literature? What if an African set his work in Greenland? Did that qualify as African literature? Or were African languages the criteria? Okay, what about Arabic? Was it not foreign to Africa? What about French and English, which had become African languages? What if an European who wrote about Europe in an African language? If. And then he goes on and then he says, this question or the question was never seriously asked. Did what we wrote qualify as African literature? So these are the questions you ask about African literature. Furthermore, the mentioning of how schools after a certain point was handed over to English authorities and how African students were compelled to learn and speak and write in English, the failure of which made them face humiliating consequences such as being whipped by cans on their bare buttocks, carrying signs that said they are stupid or that they are donkeys, find amounts beyond what they can actually afford. So all these are indications of how shame based on native language was internalized among the Africans. In addition, students were made to pinpoint each other for speaking their native language, something that should be very normal. This is also another sign of how the colonizers made the native people turn against their own kind. Ngugi wa Thiong'o also points out how in educational institutions, students, no matter how much they excelled in other subjects, they were made to fail if they did not pass the English subject. Inherent cognitive abilities and other skills were sidelined, and the knowledge of English language became the marker of intellectual and social hierarchy. Language is used for communication as well as to carry culture. So, language as a means of communication has three aspects: the real language, spoken, and written. There needs to be a harmony among these three aspects of language, but gradually the colonizers and the imperialist power, since they could not control the former two, they took control over the last, that is writing, and therefore the harmony of the three aspects of the language is broken for the Africans. In order to continue their dominance, it is essential for the colonizers to control the religion, language, oral traditions, stories, etc. of the colonized people. Their dominance is made evident when they successfully make the natives form an internal hatred or shame towards their own religion, language, stories, culture, etc. as a whole. And by cultivating such internalized racial inferiority, it is easier for the colonizers to make the colonized bow to their imperialism. He also emphasized on how what is actually normal or what is normal has been made abnormal and vice versa. So this is highlighted when he mentions that he decided to start writing in his own mother tongue and not in European language. And this tradition, though it was supposed to be normal, was accompanied by a feeling of abnormality. His contemporaries were not very appreciative of his decision as well. Furthermore, the petty bourgeoisie, that is, people who went to universities and acquired degrees in education, produced literature in the European language. This creates a gap between the theoretical praxis and the grassroots movement to do away with imperialism, because such literature only works in favor, or such literature are only accessible to the more educated or more privileged people and not the masses. He also goes on to mention that the native language remains alive because of the efforts of the peasantry, and then goes on to point out how some petty bourgeoisie like Ngumi and Obiwali decided to write in their mother tongue, keeping in mind the broader goal of the community. Ngugi also highlights the importance of enriching African language and not just letting the European and the American language to be enriched by the African language. These Europeans and Americans have exploited the resources of the Africans, but they portray a picture as if the Africans are dependent on them to escape poverty and misery. So, by highlighting such aspects of African language and African literature, culture, and Africa as a whole, he is trying to decolonize the mind. Therefore, Ngugi wa Thiong'o in this essay underscores that the use of European language will only help in putting forward the imperialist agendas. So, in order to counter these attacks, they should use their native language because language is not just a medium of communication, but also a carrier of their culture and their identity. So, those are some very important points that we need to take note of from the essay, The Language of African Literature Decolonizing the Mind by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And to have a better or more in depth understanding of the essay, I would advise you to read the text. If you liked the video, please do leave a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.